Hello, hello. Good to see everybody. I'm hoping everyone can see the screen share. It's got the speed, great equalizer as a lead slide. So I'm Brian Kula with Kula Sports Performance, and I'm
Hey,
excited.
Brian, I don't think we can see it quite yet.
Oh, let me try sharing this guy again.
Yep.
There we go. Got it.
Yep. We're good to go.
Okay.
Good to go.
Awesome. All right, guys. Again, excited to be here. Happy Tuesday. Our sports performance business kind of took on a concept of taking everything through a speed-based environment. I kind of feel like speed is the great equalizer. And so today in this short 25 minutes or so, I want to just kind of take you through some overarching principles of how we put that together, some of the results that we've had, and then also a little bit of a layout. We won't be able to get into a lot of great detail, but I can show you kind of the way that we structure that and what that looks like. We get a lot of questions of what is a speed-based performance program. Basically for us, we feel like speed is kind of the skill set in the athletic performance that can make you faster, more powerful. We've seen all kinds of really cool things in different sports that I'll tell you about today, just from increasing an athlete's speed. So a little bit here of my background and my philosophies. I was a track coach for 31 years. I was a track and field athlete in college. I did decathlon, and I think back then just kind of fell in love with the concept of making somebody faster. I also coached football for 21 of those years, and have done sports performance kind of on and off most of my career, seriously as a business for the last 5. Basically, I feel like track and field success, we took the success we had in that sport and applied it to other sports. It worked with high school kids, it worked with professional athletes, and we really felt like we stumbled on something that was pretty good. And I think you're seeing it in the industry now of how important speed is. And we don't train every athlete like a track and field athlete per se, but we do focus on the systems that generate speed. So a little bit of it was kind of, we backed into that concept. We had some hunches and some concepts that were helping our track and field athletes. We felt like if we applied those to court and field athletes that we would get some of the same results, and we did. So some of it is just kind of differentiating the fundamental beliefs of training versus like the trends that are out there and what we've seen historically. And we just weren't afraid to kind of try something a little bit different. But basically, I mean, there are some old school approaches. My dad was a coach for 35 years. I kind of grew up in a weight room and a track around him. And we've tried to bring in some of those principles that came from the Eastern European bloc, and, you know, keeping things simple and consistent and trying not to overcomplicate things. There's a lot of information out there these days. I think one of the things we've tried to do is streamline it and make sure that, you know, we kind of have a system in place that we follow. But we also found that athletes love it. And for us as a business, it's really helped us succeed. Get probably 9 out of 10 kids walk through our door, have a request, they want to get faster. So I know there's a need out there, pretty healthy for our business. Here's just kind of a list. Maybe you want to screenshot this of the different coaches that have had influence in me in my life and some of the people that I've learned from. I think this is a really good list. If I was a coach, just getting started, these would be some of the people that I'd go through and research. Tony Wells was a longtime track coach. I learned from him as far as a speed power guy goes. Here in Colorado, it gets cold. We have to do a lot of the training inside in under 30 meters of space. People wonder often, how do you get that done? Well, a lot of short explosive power work leads to greater speed. Bill Carson had some philosophies around always working at the 95th percentile or higher. I think that had a big impact on me when I was a young 23-year-old head coach on how do we train these kids. Vince Anderson, obviously very famous for his formulas and concepts and acceleration. Charlie Francis, big track and field programming guy, use his concepts often. And then Kareem down in South Carolina, who used to be at Colorado State. I got to do some work with him on speed development, max velocity, and formulating some of the trochanter measurements for wickets. Dan Paff, I think we all know Dan, unbelievable, sometimes talks way over my head, really smart guy that has a bunch of great ideas around rest theories and body care. Barry Ross was a book for underground sea running faster that we took some of our lifting concepts from. Makes a lot of sense. We had a lot of success with it, especially with our female athletes. Tony Holler with the Cats was a guy that him and I formulated a relationship on just being different, kind of a rebel, rebel and buck the system, do things a little bit differently. We had a lot of things in common that way of, we were both doing things a little bit different than what mainstream was. Then Bobby Stroop down at APEC, who has an incredible movement-based performance system and just really how to run the business. Kind of took a lot from him when we started our business 5 years ago. Had the fortune of working with some of the best athletes, I feel like, in the world. A couple of runner-ups on there, but that's a pretty good list to become a runner-up on in a Heisman. The Bowerman, and then Jay actually won the Mac Herman 2 years in a row. But we've seen it work with these type of athletes, and that's why I showed the slide. Is we're not just working with kids in the developmental stage. We're actually working with elite level athletes as well. And then the best of the rest, this is kind of the chunk, and probably most of your athletes are just high school kids, middle school kids, developing athletes that want to get faster, want to excel in their sport. And so this is kind of the majority of the kids that we work with. I think what we've done is to try to create a system that's agnostic for all athletes. It doesn't really matter when you walk through the door what sports you play. We feel like what we do impacts every sport. So the 30,000 foot view on what is dead center for us. Dead center for us is we feel like if we can make you faster, you're going to have a better potential for athletic performance. The way we define that is we're always going to try to create higher linear velocity. So miles per hour, acceleration. We do some change of direction work, obviously, but that's really our goal, is to try to make a kid faster. The guardrails around the training are really just to make sure that we're not going outside of our training philosophy, which is, a whole bunch of aerobic capacity work or a whole bunch of fatigue induced training or hypertrophy type training. Those are kind of the guardrails that we try to keep in place for our trainers to ensure that we're still, close to what dead center would look like for us. We do like to give our coaches a little bit of creativity and freedom, because there's a lot of different ways to get to the same end game. So, different examples of acceleration work. Doesn't matter really which ones you pick, as long as they match the energy system or the theme of what we're trying to accomplish in a day of training. The out of bounds things, I mentioned a couple of them. We're not a CrossFit environment. We're not a high aerobic, environment. We do have track and field athletes that need a certain level of lactate threshold work. But primarily we're working on force output, power output, and really trying to push up miles per hour for kids in a max velocity situation. Now, the weight room's part of that, but it supports what we're doing in the movement piece. So here's kind of a little bit of a nutshell of what we are defining as speed-based performance. We prioritize the speed. So the movement component, if we have to give away something, we're probably going to give away the weight room. We're probably going to give away some aerobic work or fitness work. We're going to focus and prioritize on speed. It's something that you can't train every single day. It takes rest and recovery. So sometimes there becomes the need to prioritize it and be okay with limiting some load on an athlete. We try to stay 1 inch wide and a mile deep. We want to get really good at a few things and try to reach mastery in the things that we're doing. I think right now with the internet and social media, variety is all over the place, and you can find 15 different variations of any one exercise. I think for us with developing athletes, middle school, high school age kids, we would much rather see them have mastery in a movement over variety, especially in speed development. We feel like the 10,000 hour principle of getting a kid ingrained in muscle memory and feeling what it's like to push through their foot, hit certain positions, doesn't need to have a ton of variety. We want to almost bore them to death with getting really, really good at the small things. Our intent is to increase max velocity, which also then increases the submax velocity. And so I've spoke before on, Christian McCaffrey as an example, who plays 4 quarters of football at a high level. And, oh man, he must do a whole lot of fitness work. He does no fitness work. All we really work on is trying to drive up his top end so that he can then be faster than everybody else in the 4th quarter. But it all starts and stems from the max velocity output. Most of the things that we do are 98% output or greater. We feel like this is the majority of the training. And again, we don't want to get good at running slow. We want to get good at running fast. And at some level, there's injury prevention to that, of when there's a bunch of submaximal sprinting, you could set yourself up for injury. In regards to, we run slow a bunch, and now we get into a game situation, we run as fast as we can. You see a lot of soft tissue injuries that way because there's just no resiliency from not having had exposure to the high speed. The stimulus that we present is to develop the central nervous system to respond accordingly. If we want to move fast, we have to train that central nervous system to have those neural abilities. And so the things that we do, no matter if it's change of direction or even sometimes in the weight room, we're going to try to do it fast to stimulate the central nervous system that way. So power output to produce higher force velocity profiles, both horizontally and vertically. So speaking in terms of acceleration as a horizontal velocity and vertical as a top end max velocity, we're going to address both of those planes of movement. So some of the samples of success, this is a slide that I think is pretty important of, it's not a brag sheet, but it's more of like, it helps us validate what we're doing and why we continue to push into this idea of speed-based. We do feel like the increase in a max velocity increases submax velocity. And the best example we have is an athlete that went to Texas Tech, and she broke 3 of their conditioning records as a freshman. And Texas Tech has a pretty rich history of soccer. And soccer in general typically loves the fitness, loves the long runs and things like that. And we did none of that with her for over 2 years of training. All we did was force into speed development and made her really fast. And that translated into really good output on the conditioning tests. So again, for us, just a little bit of an idea that might be the case. We have an employee down in Texas who plays soccer, and he was never a soccer player, but he's exceptional on the field because he's really fast. He's a former track athlete. And so just another example of, as Tony Holler says, the tide that raises all boats. We think it's the great equalizer. If you're fast, you got a chance in sport, no matter what the skill set is. We don't necessarily train for sport specificity. We have a swim group that we work with. They broke 48 records last year in their club. We work with golfers. We have a couple of young ladies who are some of the best golfers in the country. One of them put 17 miles an hour on her club head speed through sprint training. And then some endurance athletes that are seeing the benefit of pushing up their maximum velocity and how that's carrying out in half marathon type distances in the efficiency of how they run. We had a pro football player. It's not just for the developmental guys. Ryan Lewis, who plays in the XFL now, was formerly with the New York Giants. In 8 weeks, went from 21.8 to 23 miles an hour with the training that we're doing. So we know that it's not just for the developmental. We also can see that it helps our professional athletes as well. So for me, it's been more of 30 years of coaching and working with everything from JV track and field up to high school kids, up to professional athletes. I think it's more than a hunch that we're seeing that the speed correlates to competitive success. So here's some of the key performance indicators that we look at: max velocity, acceleration, vertical jump, broad jump. Those are for the vertical and the horizontal power outputs. We use a force index, which is a trap bar deadlift, 1 rep max divided by their body weight, which is a really good, these kids now, some of the kids nowadays in certain sports will want to put weight on. And that's okay as long as their force output matches that weight gain. And so the force index is a really good indicator of their strength to weight ratio. And then the most ability, just the ability to be able to move, mobility, stability, flexibility. We run an FMS screen and also run through a performance evaluation, which has several of the sagittal, frontal, transverse plane work and vectors so that we can see how an athlete moves. There's a little bit of subjectivity in there, but we can see if an athlete has immobile joints that we need to mobilize. And then the movement proficiency is just the overall ability to move. We have some locomotion, our bounce fire series, which I'll go through as quick as I can today for you guys. It's a little bit subjective, but you can see when an athlete's starting to hit better positions and they're moving more fluid and efficiently. So again, just some more overarching concepts here. I'm gonna scoot through some of these as we get short on time. We just want to make sure that we're causing adaptation to the, stimulus that we're applying. So, some athletes need more strength work. They don't accelerate well. Some athletes need more frequency work because, their central nervous system doesn't fire. And so you have to create and give the right medicine for, whatever the need is. With the strength response, for example, we have to lift heavy. So, obviously there's certain exercises that we pick that we like better than others. But you have to be able to have some level of strength response throughout. We don't chase big numbers in the weight room. We're not, really all that concerned with a 1 rep max, but we do feel like to get a good response out of strength, you have to lift heavy weights. Sprinting and lifting under fatigue is not necessarily bad. There's a lot of environments where that stuff's actually good for athletes. But for speed development, it's not something that we like to live in. So we really try to keep the athletes fresh and healthy. We'd rather have a day off than a day of training if it's going to mean injury. But then also to build a robust and resilient athlete so that when they are exposed to high speeds, that the injury would be down. Our soccer group saw a 24% decrease in injury. And we feel like a lot of that is because we have consistent exposure to speed. So here's a little bit, I'm going to bounce through this pretty quickly of how we set up a movement session. We start with RPR. I think turning on the nervous system is a really important thing. We'll go through some proprioception work. Big deal, talking about the big toe and the foot placement, and being able to maximize the force output of getting to the big toe when sprinting. A lot of that comes from proprioception and the awareness of the body position. So we'll do some of those things like spring ankle and see some proprioceptive work before we start even moving. We'll go through some mobilizations and cars. I think hip mobility and ankle mobility and things like of that nature are going to be critical components to the development of speed. Obviously, you can see them in the old picture there. We want certain joints mobile and certain joints stable. Those mobility joints, hip, ankle, thoracic, we want to see those things be able to move because the body obviously moves on different planes while sprinting. And so we want to try to make sure we mobilize those. Our locomotion series is just a series of dynamic warm-up, kind of skipping, jogging, moving, karaoke, different things like that, just to get the body temperature up. I'm not going to show the videos just because of time restraints today. But then we have some dynamic groundwork. A lot of people are doing these kind of things of hip mobilities, 90-90s, back rollovers, getting the T-spine moving, things of that nature. Then our SFT movement, which is our sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane movement of squats, push-ups, planks, shoulders, pivots, hip drivers, all the different joints and things that we need to get warmed up. Really, really good for a warm-up exercise before we even start our bounce fire series. And that way we're certain that everything's been loosened in 3 different planes of movement, because even in sprinting, there is a 3-dimensional movement going on. Our vector work, which again is just kind of a progression into some of the higher intense exercises of plyometrics and the things that we're going to be doing following up. And then we get to the bounce fire series. And this is a series of exercises that, frankly, it's a kind of a systematic approach to how we want kids to strike the ground. Everybody starts, it seems to be, with where their knee should be in position, high knee, dorsiflexion is one, obviously. We just like to start from the ground and teach them how to strike the ground properly and how to push through the ground with the foot. So the biggest thing we're looking for here is, are they pushing through the foot? What's their body alignment? Do they have a slight positive forward lean? Are they front-sided? meaning is their knee in front? Is their heel under their hamstring? So that we're trying to avoid and limit the backside mechanics. We know there's a certain amount of backside mechanics that are going to happen, but we want to try to limit those so we can strike the ground in front of us. Are they applying force down and back in acceleration? Are they eliminating braking forces by not putting their foot out in front of their hip? What's their recovery position look like? Do they get to the figure 4 position? Is their heel under their hamstring? This exercise of bounce fire gives us thousands of ground contacts, which again, it's almost like implementing plyometrics on a daily basis at low levels. And so the strengthening of the low leg, the ankle stiffness, all those things come into play through this series. We start to work on arm action. So we can really start to see if their hands clearing their hip, if their elbows driving back, if they're getting enough arm movement. It also provides a coachable environment. When kids are running hundreds or, longer distances, it's hard to see them running. In a bounce fire series, we utilize a 20 to 25 yard area where we can get a lot of cueing and instruction in. A lot of diversity. You can do it linear, lateral, and change of direction. So we have a whole series built around that. So regardless of the sport or the athlete or the training session, we can usually implement bounce fire series in any of them. So it is definitely a primer for the more intense speed work to come later in the workout. So here's a quick video kind of showing the walking progression. And we do start here with most of our athletes. Obviously, we'd never teach an athlete to strike off their heel, but what this does is it teaches them how to push through their foot. And you can see too, once she pushes, she stays there. So there's that good ankle extension so that they're getting that. You can even start to talk here about getting through to their big toe. Snapping is the next progression. So now she's holding dorsiflexion as long as possible. As the ground starts to come at her, then she's going to push through that. And again, we're trying not to bob. We're trying to get full extension through the ankle joint. That then progresses into the bounce. Okay, so we get this straight legged. We're just working with the feet here. And we're loading the foot and pushing through the foot. You're starting to talk about all those indicators that we just looked at in the previous slide. And then bounce just has a progression to it. We start to quick bounce now, where we start to integrate a little bit more neural CNS. It's moving a little faster. We're still trying to hold that dorsiflexion and make sure that there's no braking forces. Turn that into a long bounce, which, a lot of people call a straight-legged bound. We just call it long bounce because we're still focused on the ankle joint. We want to take a longer stride by pushing through the ground harder. Our tight skirt movement is 3 long bounces followed by 3 quick bounces, which has, again, then a little bit of stimulus to the central nervous system of having to change course from long to short. So now we're starting to work on some frequency. We jump into the fire here. Okay, this is just a single leg fire. Some people call it a dead leg or just a single leg high knee run. This is just our fire series. So again, we're trying to look at all those different positions that they're hitting. Recovery, front-sidedness, are they down and back? What do their arms look like? It's a really good look unilaterally at the development of these positions. Okay, we turn them into long, and of course, there's several different variations of this exercise. I'll show you just a few more here. This is an Olympic sprinter, Jeremy Dodson, ran for Samoa back in 2016. But again, this is just him, long, regular bounce, quick bounce. Here's a long bounce. Again, we're cueing everything from body position, ground strike. Is he dorsiflex? Is he pushing through the ground? Okay. Lots of different ways to be able to coach the kids up. Here's a little bit of look at some of the lateral series. So here he's pushing through his right foot. Still same concepts. Dorsiflexion, push through the foot. Is it landing under his hips? So what we found is even on a lateral movement with a basketball player or a volleyball player, some of these same concepts still apply. We just turned them sideways. Here's a long bounce lateral. Okay, so he's going to push a little bit harder. We can go backwards, which is a great way to resequence some of how the muscles fire. We find that we get a lot of success with some of the backwards stuff with kids that are struggling going forward. So we really kind of start to see how their feet are moving and really healthy for the hamstrings and gastrocs and soleus to fire in a different sequence. And then he's going to fire. So here's a fire on the right leg. You can see it's down and back. Here's a short quick. There's a long bounce. Now we're starting to look almost like we're running. And then he's going to alternate. So again, we get a little bit of diversity in there by switching it up. Coordination and rhythm being a huge component of speed. So a lot of this stuff is just, I mean, it's a rabbit trail. You can do all kinds of different creative things to force your athletes into just to being a better athlete. So here, now we start to run. So he's going to go 3 on the right, and then he brings in the left. See if we can show that one again. Okay, and after he brings it in, now effectively, we've just rewired and restructured their sprint mechanics. Okay, so it's kind of a progressive buildup into some of our sprint stuff. And then you can see that there's some lateral movement here as well. Same thing, this is a fire on the right leg. Positions are the same. If a kid can fire linear well, they usually fire lateral well. We even do some lateral movements with our track sprinters. I think it's very healthy to move in all 3 planes. Okay, a little bit of change of direction for your field and track sport athletes. I'm sorry, field and court sport athletes. Where, you know, a defensive back might be backward to forward. You might have a basketball player change of direction. You could do 45s. Here you can see he's going backward to forward. Lots of different variability there. Okay. I think that's all I had today, guys. I know we went through some of that stuff pretty fast. I think you can kind of see some of the things that we prioritize, and certainly are available to answer questions. If you just reach out to us, info@kulasp.com. We'll be happy to get back to you with any information that we can help you with. I think we're going to go into some Q&A here now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that was some awesome content for all these coaches. Our first question was from Eric. He asked, how does speed help softball players?
So I think with speed, the way we think about speed is that we really think about an athlete moving better, moving faster, not necessarily in the vein of running faster. We do think that running faster, obviously, if you can get from first base to second base faster, that's going to be an enhancement to your softball players. But also if they can swing the bat faster, if they can get to a ground ball faster. We train a lot of softball players actually, and we see a huge improvement in their batting average, in their fielding average, just because they're able to move better. It's an enhancement to the central nervous system more than an exercise to run fast, if that makes sense.
Awesome. And then the next question we got is if this presentation can be sent out to the attendees.
I will check with Saxon. If we can send it out, I'd be happy to.
Yes, sounds good to me. Awesome. And the next one asked, how would you respond to the folks that say athletes like Christian McCaffrey could do any type of training and probably still be an elite level NFL player / athlete?
I'd say they're right. There's certainly that to be said about any elite athlete that probably is pretty adaptable to anything that you do. I think that there's a level of, you know, really dissecting what they do as an athlete and then providing, you know, the most important thing for them is super important for even that elite athlete. So certainly the development of a younger athlete is probably even more critical of what you're doing versus those other athletes. In fact, with those professional athletes, you almost have to be careful how much you do. So it's a much more guarded approach to their training.
Awesome. And this next question says, how long does this training take before seeing it progress in games and practices?
I think we see a 4 to 6 week window. I think after the 3rd week of learning and adaptation, we really start to see things start to change. As far as output and like big number improvements, 0.2 of a second, a 40-yard dash is probably more at the 6 week mark. So somewhere in that window of time of 4 to 6 weeks is usually where we start to see kind of the spike in performance.
Awesome. And the next question asks, what advice would you give to parents who want to get their young athletes involved in speed training?
I mean, well, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, we talk to a lot of parents that have kids in so many sport activities, they don't even have time for training or injury prevention or speed work. So, I mean, I would just give them the green light to prioritize it and make sure that they get a day or two a week into exposure of what training is. I think it's the wave of athletics nowadays.
Great. And then this coach asks, how do you deal with training burnout with athletes?
I think you got to keep it fun. And I think that's part of our philosophy is with the speed-based stuff. I mean, I was a decathlete in college and I didn't love showing up and running repeat 200s on a day. And not that some of it wasn't needed, but I think that especially the millennial kid, the youth athlete nowadays, they don't love to hurt. They don't love to do hard things. But there are ways to enhance athletic performance without, grinding them and causing them to not enjoy what they're doing. So I think there's a level of keeping it fun. I mean, I'm in business, and so you take it really serious, and we do. But we also try to keep it light and focus on relationships and having a good time. Introducing the testing and the different things that keep them motivated to want to continue to train.
Awesome. And then going on to the last question, one coach asked, how young is too young to start?
I think for formal speed training, you're looking at about age 9 or 10 is probably pretty good. I think alpha level training, we do some of that ages 5 to 8, but it's really more gymnastica and, kind of playful type of training, balancing and jumping and some of the things like that. I don't think you need to overload the system when they're that young. So formally for us, it's like that 9, 10-year-old age range.
Great. And then this coach asked, what does lifting weights look like within this type of training?
Yeah, and I'm sorry we didn't get to some of the weight stuff. But it has to match the training, I would say, if that makes sense. And what that means is, on an acceleration day, we're gonna stay pretty strength based, like power based. There's gonna be a strength load with speed involved. And we structure it that way so that there's a theme within the training. So if we have an accelerated theme day, then we're going to have kind of an accelerative weight room day as well. The way we structure our weight room is we usually hit an Olympic lift first. Our second block is usually a heavy bilateral paired with a plyometric. Our third block is an upper body push pull that could be vertical or horizontal. And our last block is a posterior chain or unilateral. So that's kind of our flow on a daily basis. And then how we mix those up has to pair with the running that we're doing, and obviously the intensity and the time of year or time of season that they're in.
Great. And then Coach Snook asked, volleyball players must read/anticipate each play of the ball. What do you recommend for athletes to improve/reduce their recognition time to move on play?
Yeah, I think some reactive drills are really good. I think to the point of speed training enhances the central nervous system. That's going to enhance reaction time because as frequency and ground contact time and all those things improve, so will your reaction time. So we know that to be true from reactive testing of when their miles per hour gets faster, their reactive also gets faster. So, and we don't necessarily focus on those skills of reacting. We're going to let the sport kind of train the sport when they go to practice and do all their sport training. We're just going to continue to try to increase and enhance our central nervous system to be able to move faster, make those decisions quicker.
Awesome. And then Bill asked, is it too late to try to improve speed for a senior athlete that is going to play lacrosse at the college level?
Never. I don't think it's ever too late to implement a speed program. We have athletes that have trained in different systems that show up as junior in college, even professional athletes that, have kind of maybe gotten away from it a little bit and seeing enhancements and improvements. So I don't think it's ever too late to implement those things.
And then Eric asked, what fitness ball exercises are good for softball players?
Without going into great detail on specific with fitness balls, we like a lot of medicine ball. throws and catches for acceleration and deceleration properties. So I would definitely implement some med ball stuff into your programming. They can be paired or stacked with your weight training stuff. I think it's very, very good. Some of the rotational throwing and stuff is definitely beneficial for any rotational sport, like a softball player.